Cool. We're recording now. This is Kubernetes SIG Network from April 1st, 2021. Tim, you want to start us off?
Sure will.
You should be able to share.
Let's pick the right window. This one, yes. Everybody can see that?
Looks good.
All right. All right. I've got the list of this week's issues down to 5. I responded to a few myself, and the rest are looking okay. First one is a test fail around SCTP connectivity. And I have no other information. I did not click through on this one. Volunteers?
First of all, SCTP is not an alpha feature, so it shouldn't be in that test job, should it?
That is a good observation.
Sign this to me, I guess.
Yeah, SCTP went GA last time, so.
That's all right. As I was trawling through one of the types.go files, I noticed that there's still a comment in some of the network policy structs that says, this is a beta field as of 1.8. So. All right. I filed this issue this week because there was an open PR in this area, and there's been lots of great discussion, which was exactly the reason why I filed the issue. It doesn't really need to be discussed here, but I thought it might be worth spending a minute on. The issue at hand, for anybody who hasn't read it, is we have some logic in kubeproxy, specifically Docker shim, and in kubeproxy and in kubelet Docker shim, which for node ports and host ports respectively will try to open the port on the host OS before it installs any sort of port forward. The idea being to not steal ports from other applications that might already be running. In the case of a node port, it doesn't actually not take the port, it just complains about it. In the case of a host port, it actually will fail to launch the pod if it can't claim all the host ports that the pod has asked for. And this is nice if, for example, your pod claims host port 22, and you won't actually steal the traffic away from the SSH daemon. The problem is the logic is kind of twisty, and in kubeproxy, all we do is complain about it. And in kubelet, if kubelet itself restarts, we don't actually go through this process again. And this is a long open bug, so it sort of mitigates the value of it. And we could either fix the bug, like figure out how to do this properly, or just abandon this idea as not super useful. I don't have a strong feeling either way. There's been lots of good discussion here. I just wrote a comment a few minutes ago as I was prepping for today. My fear is that even if we fix the bug and we make an out of process port holder daemon, it doesn't actually fix the attack vector, because all I have to do is make the SSH daemon crash, right? Send it thousands of connections and it, and then I can steal its port and it can never get it back. So I'm not sure that actually solves the problem in a meaningful way. So I'll leave it there. If anybody wants to talk about it now, we can spend a couple of minutes on it, or we can just punt it back to the bug. But I think it's an interesting discussion.
At what point do we say that cluster administrators should have better control over their clusters and not let things claim ports below a certain number? Like, I mean, yeah, there's probably legit reasons to have your pods on 22 in some clusters, but certainly not for most clusters. And it feels like that should be an explicit decision. And then after that, you kind of assume that everything else is managed by kubelet, and that kubelet or something or network plugin could arbitrate after that.
Yes, that is I think that is a big basis of the original thought process behind this. Like, don't do that is really my feeling.
I mean,
host
it goes
ports
along with
are-
preventing pods from running that are trying to claim that host port, right? And I thought we did that
Yeah.
in some cases already. Like there is a range of allowed host ports, is there not?
No, host ports
No?
are
Okay.
whatever the heck you want. But host ports in general are a very dangerous feature, and so they're one of the first things that security conscious admins should probably turn off via policy. We don't make it easy to turn it off. There's pod security policies, and there's like gatekeeper and those sorts of things, right? Like go do it yourself. So one option here would be, like other things that we've talked about with these super dangerous features, to offer a admission controller. But what we don't want to do is invent a new policy language where we say users X, Y, and Z are allowed to use ports A, B, and C. So it would, if we were to do anything, it would be very coarse, right? Like don't use it at all, or only use it on namespaces, only allow it on namespaces labeled X, or only allow it on ports higher than 1024, or whatever like 1 or 2 rules we would want to institute. And that would leave everybody else to go and do it yourself. Is that useful? Is that worthwhile?
I mean, if we think this is a foot
I mean,
gun, maybe it wouldn't be the worst idea to make sure people turn it on purpose.
Well, I mean, the problem there is it's on by default. So the default has to be open. And so we can give people a muzzle for their foot gun. There's no good analogy here. A cork for their foot gun. But they still have to opt into that. And like most of these admission controllers, if you go through a hosted provider, you don't have access to those flags in the first place. So now your hosted provider has to take that and re-expose it through their own APIs or control planes. And will they do that, and how long will it take, and will users engage with it? Like the diminishing returns kicks in pretty fast.
Don't pod security policies already allow control over whether pods can specify host ports?
Pod security policy does. I know there's some disfavor for pod security policy among the security conscious folks. I'm not really sure I know all the details about why, but I had heard general grumbling that PSP was going away in favor of arbitrary policy control. Or maybe not going away, but at least not getting much better.
It kind of feels to me like people should take care of pods. That's what opposed to conflicts with the host.
Sorry, Dan, you broke up for a second for me. I don't know if it was just me.
Yeah, sorry. No, it was not just you. It kind of seems like kubelet should take care of pods, but it's harder, or it's a longer stretch to say that kubelet should take care of pods and everything to do with host stuff. And so maybe it's, make sure that pods, don't conflict with each other on host ports, but then just punt everything else, but make it easy for people to turn it off, and not use certain sections of ports.
So Lucky says in the chat, there's a PSB coming back as a different interface yet to be named. There's a KEP for that. So maybe the answer here is just not do anything. Just this isn't an urgent issue. I don't know how many people have had. I have never heard of a customer who had this explode on them. I don't. That's not to say it hasn't happened. I just have never heard about it. So anyway, we've spent enough time on this. We can carry this back into the bug. On one hand, I would love to just delete this code because I find it of dubious value. On the other hand, if we can make it valuable, then cool, let's keep it, right? Like going back to the idea of IP and node port allocations, like maybe this falls into the same category as a node port allocation, and the savvy cluster admin will earmark that port 22 is used for something, and therefore the scheduler won't even schedule pods that try to use port 22. I don't know.
One thing, Tim, is the Docker sync code is going away with the Docker sync deprecation. So the only thing that we have in KK is the kube proxy.
That's true. That is true. Though I don't know what the CNI equivalent of the host port forwarder does. I don't know if it's smart enough to detect that failure and then fail, or if it just says, nope, I'm fine.
No, it's worse because it's stateless.
Yes.
We don't have the code though. We still, we have the API field. We define the existence of the feature. So its security is still on us, even if we're not the implementation of it.
So let's move it back to the bug. I thought this was a fun issue with lots of possible vectors for solving it. So lots going on in the chat, which I can't keep up with. So I'll move forward to the next issue. This one is, for the record, 100643, and please feel free to jump in. Issue number 100622, relaxing constraints of pod DNS config. There's actually a PR to go with this one. So I think it's reasonable to, I already did. I marked it as triage accepted. It's basically a feature request. The request here is saying the kubelet has legacy restrictions on the number of DNS search paths and the total size of the search path, which date to really, really, really old glibcs. That has been recently fixed so that those limits are no longer true, and so the PR is proposing to just remove the limits. It looks to me like the PR author has in fact done their homework and tried out various other DNS resolvers to make sure that they don't explode. I did a little bit of that myself and confirmed that at the worst, some of these resolvers ignore entries after 6 or after 8, but none of them exploded. Or at least the ones I tried. He's tried more than I have. So I'm inclined to let this PR proceed, but I thought it was worth bringing up here. Anybody have concerns about this?
I added a comment because the thing is, there are a lot of unknowns, and my concern is what happens if after 4 months or 6 months somebody comes with, I don't know, one weird language or operating system or whatever thing, and it fails. Because Windows, we don't know what is the impact of this in Windows, or Windows doesn't care about the glibc.
Yeah, well, Windows in general seems to have different rules around DNS resolution and search paths and stuff. So that's a completely valid question.
So I think that Andrew Saikin did a similar fix. It's just a small cap, put a feature gate, and people can opt in. And once we are confident that there are no problems, it's just removed. I mean, the PR is very simple. It's pretty small.
So if I recall, the PR was not feature gated. So maybe that's the fix here, is add the feature gate and start it in alpha. Actually, maybe even just start it in beta because there's no new API on it, right? And just start it in beta and say, we're going to leave it in beta for at least 2 releases.
I think something that we can roll back safely, because this, I mean, at least with Kind, we have a lot of weird issues with weird distros or you know, I mean, everything with DNS is dangerous.
That's good feedback. Anybody else? All right. Kubelet, provide a feature to configure CNI through config versus lexicographic order. We talked about this one, I think, last time, right? And the user just posted an update a couple days ago asking for, what if we made it a kubelet config? And if you don't specify the config, then we fall back on lexicographic order. Dan, you're on this bug. I don't have a strong feeling of whether this is worth doing or not. Your thoughts?
I mean, the other thing is that this stuff gets pushed out to the runtimes now anyway. And once Docker shim goes away, we're not really going to have a capability to specify any kind of config. So it seems like we are kind of punting it. I think there's still, you know, kind of a larger open discussion that's been on ice for a while around, could we do more native network configuration type stuff in a more Kubernetes-y way. Like, should something like this, instead of being a kubelet option, be a custom resource that is agreed on by everyone or something like that? But I don't think it's probably good to be a kubelet option, especially going forward.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable argument. Like, this option will have no target
Yes.
soon. So,
Yep.
All right, you want to follow up on that?
Yep.
Thanks. Last one, which we looked at a few weeks ago, and Cal signed up to look at, and I haven't seen any updates on. This is the following of probes through the host name field through the host field off to other nodes. Cal, I don't know if you're here, but it's just a ping.
I think he did not make it today, but I can check with him as well.
All right, well, I pinged it. It'll show up in his mailbox or something. And that's it. That's all the issues we got today. And I did look at the DNS repo, by the way. It was on the agenda. There was zero issues in there.
Yep, I checked as well. Thank you, Tim.
Cool. I think the next item was from Jay around keyproxy. If you're here, Jay.
He makes up his own meetings, but he doesn't come to ours.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of already had this meeting that it's talking about there, right? Like last Friday. So
Yeah.
We had the kickoff meeting.
In that case, we'll skip right over it and move on to Ricardo.
Yeah. Hey, folks. So last meeting, when we were discussing about ingress in Nginx, I told you that Chris was already taking care of that. But then I took a look into the issue that that Alejandro stepped down, and Chris was also stepping down because I guess you saw that he was moving from companies and wasn't with enough time probably to take care of ingress in Nginx. So I reached him and said to him that probably we should take a look into this and discuss about the risk of this, because I don't know anymore if ingress in Nginx, which is probably the mostly used ingress, is maintained by someone. Yeah, and that's it.
So I think it is a huge risk, but we can't require people to work on it. As a SIG, we can say we'll take over it, but that doesn't mean anything unless we have people who are volunteering to do it. I don't presume that that's you, Ricardo.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I can't deal with that into my plates. Otherwise,
Understood.
probably, yeah.
Understood.
I have some time to take a look into the issues, but not developing anything else. There are some folks working on that. I can probably ping them and see if they want to become maintainer of that. I don't know if Bowie is also taking a look into that because his name is on the owner's thing, but
yeah, unfortunately, I'm not currently actively there. I thought there were a bunch of people who volunteered, but apparently not.
Yeah, this time I didn't.
Yeah.
Okay, I can probably try to make some noise here, Tim, and see if someone wants to maintain that.
Okay, that would be a great start. If we can't get people volunteering, it might be worth bringing this up to the level of like steering and just letting them know, like, I don't know if this is the first time it's happened, but it's certainly an important milestone, right? Something we depend on is effectively abandoned. What should we do? Should we try to find money to hire contractors through CNCF? Should we make a lot of noise and try to drum up new people? But if you can find people organically, that would be a better answer, right? So why don't we push this to the agenda for like 2 weeks or 4 weeks, and if we can't figure something out, then we'll figure out an escalation plan.
Sounds good to me.
My suggestion, if we're putting it on the agenda for a couple weeks from now, is we try to carefully, clearly scope what it is, like links to the repos, what it is we're looking for people to say yes to, just so that, if people are looking to get involved, they can figure out if it's something that's relevant to them.
Firstborn children is what we're asking for.
Well, firstborn cats do.
Definitely.
I'll tell you what, Bridget, I'll cover you. They can have both my kids. Just this once, though. You get me next time.
At what age do you stop being a firstborn child?
I don't think it ever happens.
Oh, damn. Let's not go with that approach then. I think Govind is up next. Govind, on mute.
Yep. Hi there.
Hey there.
Hey, thanks for the time, everyone. I hope everybody's staying safe and healthy. I wanted to pick up our FQDN thread that we had talked about some time ago. We've gotten some really good feedback from the community on the one-pager, I guess two-pager that I'd written some time ago. It was so much feedback that I didn't know how to process it and put it all into a doc again. So we thought it would be a good idea to maybe make it more actionable by putting out an open source sort of network policy controller that just generates FQDN, network policies based on an FQDN CRD that we have proposed. So I just wanted to evangelize that with the group here, with the community. Wanted to start getting feedback on this, as to what all of you think, and provide your expertise and any sort of gotchas that we've sort of overlooked. Mind you, this is obviously a sort of a very basic, for the lack of a better word, version of what we intend to do eventually. But I think the more important point here is, can we get to an agreement on what the first iteration, at least, of the FQDN policy CRD should be, or just the FQDN policy resource should be. So this is linked here. It's on GitHub. It's accessible to all, and I very much encourage feedback directly on GitHub. Please try it out. Please, give it a whirl. We've gotten some good response from some customers here as well, and it sounds like we're on the right track. But I'd love to get more validation from folks in this group for whom this is bread and butter stuff.
Gobind is. I just clicked on the link and it takes us to a Google Cloud Git repo. Is the intention to get this to be something with a kates.io suffix that the community supports, or are we just looking for general nodding at the model?
Yeah, so the intention eventually, as you said, Tim, is to get it into the Kubernetes, open source model, so that we actually have an API dedicated to FQDN policy. This is just I guess a first step in that direction to build consensus, so that we know what the model should be, because there are a lot of semantics here. For example, what type of DNS records do we support, or how frequently do you refresh your caches and things like that, which were hard to capture in a two-pager, to be quite honest. So to sort of keep those nuances, or bring them more saliently across, we got this as a first step, but the intention here is fully to get this into Kubernetes networking and open source. Yes. So any questions? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, is this an attempt to kind of POC this approach with the possible future addition to network policy, or do you envision it standing outside of network policy forever?
I'd personally be okay with either, as long as it makes it into a standardized Kubernetes OSS model where customers can use this no matter where they're running Kubernetes. That's really the goal here. Whatever makes sense from a taxonomy / topology view of including this resource into Kubernetes, whether it's tucked under network policy or maybe a peer of network policy, I'm not really sure. And I think that's something that hopefully will come out as we start getting some validation on this concept. But yes, to your point, it is very much a POC in which I would like to get affirmation from the community at large to say, hey, look, this actually makes sense. Customers want this. We should build this. And this CRD that you proposed looks about right for what we want to capture, at least for the V1.
So the interesting dilemma here is because today, I remember looking at this a while back, it generates network policies, right? So
Yes.
making it be a network policy makes it difficult to self-referentially like edit yourself. I mean, I don't know if we have any other examples of that.
Well,
Yeah, anyway,
I
that's
would
it.
assume if it was part of network policy, we would just expect that implementations would do
Yes.
this themselves and
yeah, that was my thought.
not rely on some other controller.
And,
Right.
and then we don't have any written record of what the reification of those names were, right? So there's a small advantage to actually having it generate network policies explicitly.
Network policy status.
Oh God.
I
So
have
where-
actually answered this status in cluster network policy then. That we should probably have that.
Where are you looking to get feedback?
On GitHub directly on the page that I've linked. If if you wanted to report issues there or leave comments, that would be very, very useful. You could also sorry, go ahead.
It's difficult to leave comments without opening a PR or an issue. This is the downside of GitHub. You can't look at somebody's file and leave comments unless there's an open PR on it.
Gotcha.
Maybe like open a pull request on the README, and you have to go touch every line. I don't know. Think about how to collect feedback on it.
Oh boy, I screwed this one up. Sorry, I thought that GitHub would be more friendly in terms of feedback collection. From an open source perspective, I should have given it more thought. Okay. I'll circle back on this and maybe update the GitHub page so that people know how to report feedback. Tim, are you muted?
Tim?
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry. If you open a pull request against your README file and just touch every line of the README file, then anybody can come and comment on those lines, and then it behaves more like a Google Doc or something. But you have to actually touch like 1 out of every 5 lines in order for GitHub to let you make comments on it.
Got
so
it.
like
Okay.
if you come through and just add a plus at the beginning of every line or something, and then
got it. Sounds good. Makes sense to me. Okay, I'll work on that, and then hopefully that'll be intuitive enough for folks in the community to actually leave comments there, and then we can start moving this towards converging this towards Kubernetes OSS. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Any questions?
Yes.
No. All right. Cool. Well, thank you. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, Kevin. Next up, we have Lara to talk about multi-cluster DNS.
Hello, I am going to share my screen. So hi, everybody. My name is Laura. I'm from SIG Multi-Cluster, and I want to talk about multi-cluster DNS. I put a bunch of links in here to a doc, some slides, which I'm going to share some of the slides today, and a pull request. I'm going to kind of circle back, but anyways, there's a lot of deep lore here, I guess, if you want to get to all of the previous documents and stuff, that's what those are linked to. So one of those links is the slide deck, which was originally made for to talk about this in SIG multi-cluster. So there's a bunch of like detailed stuff in here about how DNS operates today that might be like old news to everybody here, but I'm going to go through a little bit just to explain the situation, and then spoilers at the very end. There's a slide that says questions to SIG network, which is what I'm looking for expertise on. So basically over in SIG multi-cluster, we're working on multi-cluster services. We have a KEP called the MCS API that describes how multi-cluster services should work. And we want them to have correct DNS names. Current implementations are extending them in kind of like a generally agreed upon way, but it's not standardized centrally, and we don't have full parity with the current cluster local DNS specification. So there's like SRV records and PTR records that are described for cluster local that nobody who's implementing MCS API is implementing yet because we haven't decided anything about it yet. So in general, based on the original spec, we need to support A records, SRV records, and PTR records, which I you all probably know, but I had to learn about. And the two types of services that we support in multi-cluster services are something similar to cluster IP services and something similar to headless services. So we call our multi-cluster cluster IP services cluster set IP services. So you might see that around. And then we kind of just call our multi-cluster headless services just multi-cluster headless services. But we need to do something similar to how DNS works in the normal way today. For example, cluster IP services get things like blue.test.svc.cluster.local as DNS names, and regular headless services today get things similar, blue.test.svc.cluster.local, or more specific to the host name of the pod, like yellow-1.yellow.test.svc.cluster.local. So just a little reminder there. So there's some slides with a lot of words on it and then diagrams, which are better. And so the diagram situation for cluster set IP that we're proposing here is that the MCS API describes that there should be this cluster set IP that is effectively the front to all of the to all these IPs back here, similar to regular cluster IP. So this should basically have a very similar looking DNS name to how this looks in cluster local, or sorry, how this looks cluster local, but the difference is that this zone here says cluster set.local. So instead of blue.test.svc.cluster.local, this is blue.test.svc.clusterset.local. This is what goes to the cluster set IP, which itself can get into the pods backing that service in cluster A or pods backing that service in cluster B. On the headless side, we needed to be able to disambiguate if people want to go to this blue pod over here versus this blue pod over here, since it's possible cluster local that they could have the same host name. So we wanted to put in a new piece of disambiguation here. So there's separate work going on in SIG multi-cluster to make a cluster ID or cluster name available within the cluster for these purposes and some others in multi-cluster. So the big difference for headless multi-cluster headless services is still with this different zone, cluster set.local. And then when we are giving all the individual DNS names to each individual backing pod, we disambiguate them by their pod host name, and then also the cluster that they're in, and then all the other normal stuff, blue.test.svc.clusterset.local. So some possible problems that we thought might be an issue, just generally want some confirmation about if we're thinking about the headless service DNS case properly. We know that stateful sets is like the hot thing. We really need to get this right to make sure that this pod DNS is right. And then we also have kind of brought up that a pod's idea of its own fully qualified domain name is potentially could be an issue if it could be a multi-cluster specific one versus being a clustered local one. So happy to talk more about any of the background in the slides that I went over very briefly here just to introduce the situation, but here's like the real questions that I want to ask SIG Network. So one thing that came up in SIG multi-cluster is, should we even include SRV records? Like, do we need to keep parity with the current cluster local specification with SRV records? Basically, this boiled down to, do people use this or not? Should we implement it or not? So some people say they're not used. Some people say that possibly certain applications like VoIP are using them. So kind of want to get a temperature from here and see what people think. And just to introduce the other questions first, and then I'll kind of open the floor. Are there any other networking related tooling that we don't know of that might get confused by pods having a cluster local and multi-cluster DNS names that we need to look O2 for, aka out for? So basically anything that's dependent on like hostname --fqdn, we feel like there might be some stuff. So maybe this group knows what those are. And then for pointer records or PTR records, since there can only be one per IP, the current implementations that are popular basically make a dummy or shadow service object that represents the cluster set IP local to the cluster. So that already gets a PTR record because of just normal cluster local DNS specification and implementation. So we're planning on kind of leaving that alone and saying, the reverse DNS will get the cluster local host name or cluster local DNS name, there we go, if this was requested. And that's kind of our standing right now. But if there's some other stuff going on with PTR records that I don't know about, then I would also defer to everybody's expertise here about whether that's going to be an issue or not. So those are my questions. And then general feedback is also welcome, but those are things I thought might be worth bringing up here, and happy to take them now or talk about them offline on either the pull request or on the doc.
Thanks, Lara. Any feedback from folks that want to talk a little bit more on the call? We have a few minutes to do that.
I was one of the people who said, let's not do SRV records unless we really know what we're doing with them.
Some people.
And I also admit that I don't have a lot of personal experience with SRV records and the systems that tend to use them. So other input would be really welcome.
Regarding the SRV record question, the only input I have is that I've dealt with a few customer issues in that area with kubedns, where we were not doing something according to the spec and the response was interpreted differently. So I do not have a great description of the use case, but I do know that there were users sensitive to how the response was returned and were doing something with it. So yeah, if that helps. And maybe the cluster.local existing ones might be enough. I don't know of a strong case to include SRV with the cluster set local, but they are being used. I have at least 1 or 2 instances of customer usage.
Gotcha.
And on the other one, the host name --FQDN, I am not sure I fully followed what the issue might be. Wouldn't the FQDN still point to cluster.local for the stateful set pods?
Yes, we expect that they would point to cluster.local. I guess I'm just generally wondering if we ever need to make that change, or if there's something that is going to be upset that a service could have been contacted by a pod elsewhere. It's kind of a general feeling more than anything super specific. So I kind of just want to know if there's any tooling that people know about that I should be looking into.
Got it. The only thing that I recall hostname FQDN being relevant for is there were some Kerberos-like setups, I think, where you could use a pod. A pod would try to reach out to it to get some auth ticket, and there would be some checks to look at the pod IP, do its PTR record, and make sure the host name that it advertises matches that. But with everything sitting with cluster.local, it looks like it will be unaffected.
Yeah, specifically that if we leave the PTR records as is.
That's the use case that I know of for that too. Somewhere there's a proposal that I think I lost track of to allow users to just put whatever they want as their in-pod FQDN. And while I was initially really against it, and we tried to set up all the structure around the headless service with a name that matches the subdomain of the pod, and it turns out that for some users that just isn't enough, and they just want to be able to put whatever they want in that field, and it doesn't matter anyway because it's only going to show up inside their pod. So why am I stopping them from hurting themselves? And I guess I agree with that. I seem to have lost track of the proposal, so I'll have to go back and find it and see if that moves forward.
Gotcha. I can try and dig it up too, but I think probably the same questions that are asked on that proposal are relevant to this. So great. Well, happy to take other points, but I will just point out that there is this pull request that you can add your comments to. It includes some changes to some like rash rationale, that's the word, in the MCS API KEP. And then there's this whole document specification.md that's supposed to be very similar to the existing specification.md that's in the Kubernetes DNS repo for everything. But if you're interested, the doc that's derived from, not all of the prose is over there, but it's possible it might be a little bit easier to read because I highlighted in orange exactly where I deviated from the existing DNS specification. So if you don't have the existing DNS specification memorized by heart, that might be like an easier way to read it. But either way, looking for your comments. Great, thanks.
Thanks, Laura. Last item on the agenda was from Rahul to talk about cluster cider.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks. Just to introduce myself really quickly, this is my first time speaking up at one of the meetings. My name is Rahul. Nice to meet you all. I work in GKE on networking. And yeah, so this is something that we've been kicking around and we wanted to basically get some feedback on whether this is an idea that makes sense for in-tree for open source, or whether this isn't something that we really want to get involved in. The idea is basically currently you can provide a cluster cider when you create your cluster, and then one of the node IPAM controller goes in and slices it up into a bunch of smaller ciders that are then sent out to the nodes. There's plenty of requests from users on being able to expand these ranges without restarting your cluster or making a brand new one. And it provides a lot of flexibility and general improvements to scaling. So the question is, do we want to be enhancing the in-tree node allocators to support multiple discontiguous cluster ciders that can be added or deleted during the life cycle of the cluster? So users can say, hey, I need more pods, just throw another /18 at your cluster, and now you have a lot more space to continue scaling. So we have put together a basic KEP that tries to outline what are the goals, what are the non-goals, and then a proposed resource that we think we define what a cluster cider is. You can create more of them, and then we'll write a new controller that would actuate and do the partitioning. That's sort of the high-level idea. The major caveat I think that we want to point out is we're not trying to say Kubernetes should be in the business of general IPAM. We want to keep this very focused on, we have a range allocator that already exists. We want to make a incremental improvement to it to say you can provide more than one range, but we don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole because there's a million and one ways to do things. So it's not in our benefit to try to support everything right off the bat. Yeah, so I'm curious if folks have any comments, obviously either right now or in the KEP as they come up.
So the goal is to remove the pod cider in node status and create a new resource, or improve current IPAM controller?
The latter. So we want to improve the current IPAM controller. There's a flag that you provide to the kube proxy, or more relevant, the kube controller manager, which says -- cluster cider, and that's the single contiguous cider from which the node IPAM controller then allocates pod ciders, and then it fills in the node.pod cider field. So we're not touching the node.pod cider field right now. We're just saying that command line flag that you provide to kube controller manager, it should really be a resource that you can extend while the cluster is alive, as opposed to having to tear down your cluster and make a new one.
Well, that's great.
I got to pre-read this proposal, and I have a lot of concerns that I've already expressed, but I would like to go through them here. This is our last agenda item, right, Casey?
That's right, yeah.
Very smart move. But before I jump in, I would love to hear if other people have thoughts or questions.
Hi, Raoul, Lockie. In high level, I agree. I'm sure Tim's gonna outline some things that I'm probably concerned with, so I'll save the floor for him to. But when we unpacked dual stack, it kind of came up a few times that maybe we could take the initiative, and we decided to park it. But we had always wanted to do that as well. So if there's any way we can help, I think Anish, who's on this call, who worked on dual stack, and maybe Cal as well, might be able to help, if not implement, but review. But I think for the question of is it worth putting in open source Kubernetes, I think the answer is yes, because a lot of people stub their toes on readdressing clusters, and the answer for them today is just provision a new cluster. And the thing is, that may not help them either, because they may have discontiguous blocks, and it doesn't. So I think in general, it's a problem, and it's only going to get worse as clusters get bigger and people use Kubernetes more. And IPv6 isn't always the answer. It's probably a lot more IPv4 use cases. But we should maybe extend it so that you can add multiple CIDR v6 blocks as well at the same time, because we're going to hit that eventually as well. When people say that 10 billion addresses isn't enough for my personal Raspberry Pi network. So all this to say, I think, high level, I agree with it in spirit. And I think it's probably good to have in open source, because it's a good situation that I'll say a few people stub their toes on.
Sounds good. Yeah, we definitely are looking for, active help. If for nothing else, then at least we can define a good spec and API around what we're looking for, and then the controllers can come down the line.
Yeah, and like if I put my service provider hat on, we've worked around this on the server side. So if we pull it back out and make it standard implementation, be happy to do that as well.
I haven't read the proposal yet, but I think I would say, I agree at a high level, this is a problem of just generally wanting discontiguous CIDR space that I see people have. I'm guessing if and when I read that proposal, my concerns will be around its ties to the cluster allocator, the CIDR allocator, rather than the general concept itself.
Yeah, absolutely. There are plenty of open issues even in our CAP. Some that we've called out, some that I'm sure people will point out in greater detail.
So I'm on record previously as being sort of unhappy with the fact that Kubernetes is involved in IPAM at all, but it is, and I agree that this is a real pain point for users, and we shouldn't abandon them just because we made a mistake. So I'm generally in favor of solving this problem, but I see a lot of risks. Raul, I doubt if anything I say here will be the first time you heard it, but for the audience and the record, first of all, I think if we're going to do this, we should do it as a new module, not as extending the existing cluster allocator, because I think it's going to be different enough that almost all the code will be different. So let's just make it a different one. That seems like if it turns out that really works really well, we can maybe swap it in the old Indiana Jones idle trick and swap it into the old name. But in the meantime,
you did set off the trap, Tim.
It's true. It's true. There's a related issue to this, which is variable sized node CIDRs. There's a separate cap just for that. And I think with that cap, I made the same argument of we should just make a new module and implement variable size CIDRs there. One of the things we'll just need to figure out is the CIDR prefix size an attribute of a particular range, or is it variable within the range? Are we writing malloc, or are we writing a slab allocator? So
it is
sorry, go ahead.
malloc at the moment, the way it's proposed. The way it's written is you can specify, let's say 10.1/16 and say allocate a /24 from this in one resource. And then you can say 10.1/16 allocate a /25 in another resource, and that is okay the way it's written. So you would end up doing malloc, yes.
Yes. So then we'll need to do the conflict and overlap detection.
Yes.
So the thing that I like best about this model is it takes something that is currently a flag and it makes it not a flag, right? It makes it, we'll have to make it part of the API in band because flags are just a horrible thing to update. So imagine that there's going to be a resource that says these are the CIDRs that I'm allowed to use for my cluster, which is nice because it actually solves one of these long-standing bugs about what are the CIDRs for my cluster. The downside of it is validation of input, right? Now, when a user, if I create a node and I say, give me this CIDR range, I can statically validate it against the flag and say, sorry, this is not valid, get out of here, right? In the future, it will require us to do a different set of checks, right? We'll have to keep track of all the other objects and compare against those. Not insurmountable, but I don't know if we do that anywhere else. So we just need to go carefully. That's my biggest concern with this overall. But otherwise, I think, yes, I think we should tackle this. Antonio's thinking really hard. I can see him in the top of my corner.
Well, we went back and forth with this continuously. But the thing is, at the first step, you can move to a resource without any validation. So instead of using a flag, just say this CIDR with this prefix.
Right.
I mean, that doesn't have any of your concerns, or is it a problem? It's a question. I mean, if we take the flags and we say instead of the flags that you put the CIDR with the node, mask, prefix, whatever, you have the resource. That a problem?
I don't know if it's a problem. I just think it's different than anything else we've done, right? Where we have to actively read the resource out of the storage and then keep track of that while we resolve other API requests. I just don't know if we do anything like that anywhere else. For static validation, right? Like if you look at the validation code today doesn't have any context, right? It's all syntactic validation. There's a small number of resources that do more contextual validation, like service, right, where it has the access to the flags. I'm not even sure if we do that for Node pod CIDR today. I know we have some rules that you can't change it from a value to another value, but you can change it from a empty to a value. But I don't know if we actually even do static validation on it. So maybe I'm making a big deal about nothing, or maybe it's like a net improvement anyway. So
no, but with services we have the allocators that are doing this double validation.
We do. It's not the most pleasant. You've seen the rewrite of that code that I'm trying to put in place because it's not a very pleasant pattern. So I'm not sure we want to copy that pattern. But yes, you're right. There is precedent for that dimension of it. That still doesn't read from a resource, right?
Yeah, but you should check the kept with the allocated service allocated change. This one that have 200 comments. The last comment from Daniel Smith, because we were discussing this week too, and he suggested another approach, and I think that you should check because he's, in summary, he's suggesting to have to shard the allocator and reconstruct on output time. So you don't store the allocation, but you have some process in the API that provides the allocator. So I think that is similar to what you are suggesting.
Okay. I'll have to go and read that. I have not circled back to that in the last couple of weeks.
I mean, it's a similar situation. So you need to remember what are the CIDRs.
The biggest concern that I have is with the you're right. We would need to do it if we move the allocators off into resources. So we'll need to cross this bridge. Today I have a static flag that doesn't change, and I don't have a watch controller or anything in the API server. If we want to do this validation statically, it means the API server needs to effectively watch itself to get updates to those resources so that it can provide a static rejection, or we need to do it as an admission controller out of the API server.
But that's an interesting point, because the situation is worse right now, because this week I was playing with this. The problem is that you can now create 3 different API services with different flags on the allocators,
Yeah.
and each API server starts to fight against the other and rewrite the
Yes.
allocator. So that's
Yes.
okay. So everything is an improvement there.
Okay, that's a fair point. I don't know from a logistic code point of view. I don't know how we would write the watch from inside of a REST registry, but we can figure that out.
They have the control instance. That is the one that creates everything, and they have reconcilers there.
That's true. We do have that.
And
so maybe there is something to build on.
And the other thing that Daniel suggested is they have now the API server identity, so you are able to identify who is the they have coordination on the API server, so you really have a master, and you know who is the first API server, so you can then implement some kind of cascading.
All right. Well, we'll go look at it then. Anyone else?
I have one question now that, but is there time? Okay, let's finish this question. The thing is, with all the network policy, I was reading the CAP and it's really nice, but my question is about the API machinery. So all the comments are about including these new network policies in the group v1.networks.io and adding it as alpha. I really don't know if that is even possible, or API machine is going to allow to serve a new group that was already deprecated.
Sorry, which one are you looking at?
The cluster network policy, global.
The cluster network policy.
The question is, can we bring back networking /v1 alpha 1, given that it was previously deprecated?
That is a great question that I have asked Jordan myself, because I think the answer is no, and we would probably have to put it into v2 alpha 1.
V2.
Yay. But in my opinion, this is all kinds of messed up, and it just says to me that we're doing alpha and beta wrong, which I've raised with the API machinery folks, and they don't even disagree particularly, but it's very difficult to change. So it's a really good question, though. I don't have a canonical answer to it yet.
Well, we are just out of time now, so we'll have to finish that one up on the CAP or offline. Thanks for coming, everybody. We'll see you in another 2 weeks.
See you on the mailing list, everyone.